welcome. This is Jake Litke, your host of Cannabis Marketing Live. I'm the CEO of Mediajel. And today we have Dennis O'Malley, who I'm very happy to have on because he has a wealth of information. And he's one of the small but growing number of people I know that have both the deep experience in digital marketing as a practice and also the cannabis industry through really kind of all aspects of it. Dennis was the CEO of Caliva, brought that to market, and previously it was ReadyPulse was the one right before that. Is that correct?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, which was a digital marketing platform. This is going to be a great opportunity to see how those two things come together. Today we're going to be talking about discounts, as we have been for the last couple of weeks, and how you can develop some strategies to not lean on that as your primary method of attracting new customers and getting sales. Um, Dennis, welcome. I gave a very brief introduction, but I think most people know what Caliva is, but we do have people from all over the country, and the name Caliva doesn't really exist anymore. So maybe you could start off with how you ended up in the cannabis industry, and I know that you could probably talk all day about the Caliva story, but give us a short form version, and then we can dive into some conversation.
Yeah, of course, Jake. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a fun conversation. I think again, by way of background, is we had a tech company called ReadyPulse. Did some cool things with that. We made Instagram shoppable and put Instagram pictures and shoppable photos on websites, and that was before the term micro influencers was actually a thing. After that, had an old business partner who had an established company at the time, which was Caliva, and had a one grow room and one retail center, and went over to help him grow that, and we had some good success over 4 years, and then we sold to a SPAC in 2021. So on a 4 year basis, really had an incredible team to build a brand that it actually does still exist in a
Yes. Okay.
retail fashion. But at the time, certainly the goal was building both a retail brand and online destination, and a consumer products brand as well. And then after the 2001 acquisition, it was sold a couple times, and I left in shortly thereafter, called a year after that sale. And myself and my business partner, Hannah O'Brien, have been in a firm called Ectray, which means journey in Gaelic. And we've been hired by CEOs, boards, and investors mainly to be a CEO co-pilot and help build out an office of the CEO. And it's really centered around a lot of go-to-market, capabilities with, underlying data technology and financial infrastructure support.
Wow, that sounds like a lot. And my understanding is that you're working with companies in multiple different states around the country today. Um, how are you seeing, and that gives you an interesting perspective in terms of seeing where each state is kind of in its life cycle. And we talked about this in the past, where California and Colorado are pretty mature markets, and they've gone through many stages of the sort of cannabis operator life cycle, and we have newer states that are coming on board. Do you see that life cycle happening faster in the newer states? Have people learned the mistakes that the more mature states have made, or what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Moore's law, that says the power and the speed of a processor, over 18 months will double, just as it will be, reduced in size over that same time. You can almost put that same law into the commoditization of cannabis in every new state that goes into adult use, which is the supply of cannabis rises dramatically, and the price goes into a commoditization twice as fast as the state before it. So in general, most states are not learning from the same movie that has happened in every other mature state. And I think everybody should look at states like, California and Michigan and look at that as to what the bottom can be. It's funny that, because states like Oregon and, Colorado have gone through the real trough of disillusionment and are now a much more mature market. Those are actually can be seen as growth markets. But it does really follow a hype cycle in every market, and it's really critical to know, where you're at in that hype cycle in every market that you're at.
Great. So let's circle back to California because you had a front row seat for some of the most fun or traumatic times, depending on how you want to look at it.
All of the above.
All of the above. All right. So on a maybe a longer time scale than is happening today for newer states, let's talk about as you're growing the business and you're trying to figure out the balance of, how do you price your products against the competition when you've got people all kind of all over the place from a pricing perspective. Were you able to figure out some strategies either, through moments of brilliance or just pain and suffering in terms of how you price your product? Where, like, did you overcorrect? Did you over discount? Were you able to come back? Like, what did that look like for Caliva?
So yes, yes, and yes. I mean, it was as you know, and as anybody who's been in the seat, it never ends and it never changes. So certainly the one thing over the past 8 years that I've learned is it's hard, if not impossible, to be judgmental on kind of any company, brand, or store. The reality is that most owners or CEOs or general managers are making so many decisions every day without a roadmap, without the right support, without the right data, and they have to make those decisions. And a lot of them aren't the right decisions, but they learn from them, and it's just hard. It's a very hard industry and it's a very hard job to be able to go do that. But certainly at Caliva, I had an incredible team around me and learned a lot from them. And everything evolved, right? We started off with one store and we barely had our own house products. And at that time, the store managers had a lot of autonomy as to what to buy, what to merchandise, what to price, what things looked like, had autonomy around, what our own house brands were named and how they were positioned. But by the end, 4 years later, we had 11 stores. And, out of that 11 stores, we also had three delivery depots. And so all of a sudden you have, three very unique channels. You have a delivery channel, you have a, pickup channel, which is part of the online channel, and you have an in-store channel. And when you have that type of infrastructure and you're talking about, tens of millions of dollars on an annual basis in terms of retail sales. And I think we probably peaked somewhere around that. It was close to 100 million at the time. You're saying that you are getting into the basis where you have to have your own product team, which we did. You have to have your own pricing team. You have to have your own buying team and your own merchandising team. So when you look at that, it really evolved from one store and having some autonomy to a workflow where the buyers were really the ones that would control third-party products and what we brought in and what that pricing was in. Our product team would really control what the pricing and the margins were for our first-party products, and a retail marketing team would work with the channel owners of online and in real life to be able to have their unique pricing in there. And you had to manage channel conflict and inventory management, and everything had to be also have some autonomy to those local geos because Chula Vista is different than Northern California and San Francisco. So the sophistication in terms of footprints matter, but what I would say overall is when Hannah and I get engaged with firms today, and we've worked, in Michigan, in Missouri, in Mississippi, and in Vermont, in Arizona, in Washington, and most of the states out there, when you ask the question, who owns pricing, it's a real difficult question for somebody to answer. But in the end of the day, somebody has to own what that is, because when you start to unpack that, That means who actually owns COGS? How are you actually pricing COGS? Are you doing that based on just marginal cost? Is it, do you have allocations in there? Is it tax optimized? So when you have those COGS and you have the marginal, cost on that, who's managing the margins? Do you have the infrastructure to actually look at discounts? And when you say yes, can you answer the question about vendor funded discounts? Hard to be able to manage those, back end credits. Everybody struggles with that. Do you know the difference in what's your strategy around hard marks and actual discounts? So the pricing discipline and the product management discipline probably is the most lacking discipline that I've seen in most cannabis companies across the US.
Okay, and we talk about discipline, an example of that might be, let's say that you got a retail location, you have your pricing set up, and then a new dispensary opens, half a mile away or maybe even closer, maybe they're down the block, and they start offering a higher level discount. Let's say so I think headset last
That's
week's.
never happened in San Francisco. Come on, give me a real example.
Yeah, a real example. So the headset, when we were talking to them last week, they said that the average discount nationally is 23%. With Missouri, you mentioned actually being the lowest, around 15%, and
Yeah,
Washington, Oregon being, upwards to 35 or something like that. And then Michigan, they don't even do discounts. They just make their prices cheap, it seems like. It's just
right.
flattened out near the bottom. I'm pretty amazed at how the cost difference be for the same products here in California versus Michigan. Um, how does one have that discipline? How do you not react to that as a retailer when someone opens up down the street and they're selling the same product for less? What would you tell someone?
Well, I think you just answered your own question there, right? Which is that you're selling the same product for less. So, in the end of the day, pricing is the easiest lever to manage, and it's probably the most misunderstood. So if we just unpack the reality of who's asking the question in the organization around how much a discount costs, well, number one, that discount has to get promoted. So you're doing something or you're spending some money to actually go get that discount out there, right? So there's a promotion cost to that discount. Number two, that discount's there to go do something. How much of your existing customers who would still buy from you regardless are now taking advantage of that discount that wouldn't normally happen, right? So there's an opportunity cost and a cannibalization of that. And then maybe your discount is working to be able to get some type of customer acquisition. They come through the door. Do you also give them loyalty points as well? So when you're looking at promotion and discount and loyalty, that's a real expensive triad of things to bet a business on. Most businesses outside of cannabis don't rely on that because they know that is a death spiral for a company. But I'll give you the example. Hannah and I and Ectray have been running and managing a store in San Francisco called MetaThrive the past 3 years. Amazing staff. That store should have been bankrupt or gone in receivership years ago. It is in the worst block in San Francisco by far. There's more shootings, I think, on that block than kind of any other block on there. Yet the store is cash flow positive and has been for 3 years. And the way that they were able to do it was the following. It started off with merchandising. They knew that they couldn't sell the exact same product that high volume stores had down the street. So that wasn't an option. So it started off with Jose, who's a just amazing merchandiser out there, and he went after the right differentiated brands. And we're talking Mission District, so you'd think that the automatic basis would say, "Hey, let's go low end on this." But we took the exact opposite approach. We actually went for premium brands that could sustain a premium price point. And so when you look at some of the best-selling brands at MetaThrive, they're people like Level, they're people like Connected, they're people like Kiva, Jetty. So there are these higher end brands that have built a brand and built a brand affinity and built some brand loyalty. And we've been able to work with those vendors on a number of different ways. But you see the result of one, great merchandising. Two, because Jose is really good at what he does, the inventory turn time in MetaThrive is only 14 days. So a lot of the retailers use discounting because they just want to get their inventory turn and their inventory ratio, higher, and they don't know how to do it. But that's because they didn't merchandise well and they didn't buy well. And then lastly, Jose does a great job in terms of discounts as well. MetaThrive's average discount is 15%, and that's a budget line item. That is his KPI that he has to follow. So that is all of the store discounts and all of the vendor discounts combined can equal a 15% of net sales. And so when you look at that, that means he doesn't have a lot of room to play with, right? You have new customer discounts, you have veteran discounts, senior discounts. So he really relies on vendor funded discounts to be able to make up for a lot of that. And then lastly is MetaThrive, I think, does a couple good things on the basic level. It's a clean, well-lighted place in a part of the city that's not clean or well lit or good to go into. The bud tenders have been there a long time. They're super knowledgeable. And then lastly, they do half of their business on a delivery basis. Delivery is profitable, and they make it really easy for the customer to shop. It's a really easy website to be able to look through. So those are all things that MetaThrive have found success in San Francisco, being cash flow positive, not just profitable, cash flow positive as a dispensary in a very in a very tough market where you have a ton of competition with people opening up left and right. Hannah manages a dispensary in right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. Completely different model on it. And because it's early in terms of that dispensary, we run hot on levels of discount, but we're probably at a 25% discount rate, knowing that that dispensary's only been open for a couple of years. It's the only dispensary in town, and customer acquisition is still, a core key metric for us for that store.
Okay. Now, when you say merchandising, does that mean cool display cases, the selection of products? Like, what is that? That's kind of that could mean,
Selection of products, like which distributors are you betting on, which products are you betting on, which SKUs are you highlighting that you have that are differentiated based on your competitive set. And so that happens both in store but also online. And the reality is just that we at MetaThrive would never have the volume discount to compete against the well-known brands. In those cases, if we were going to highlight and and promote some of those well-known brands, we'd have to do so in collaboration with them, where it would be either newer SKUs that other people wouldn't have, early access to those SKUs, or some type of bundled promotion that would be unusual for us to have. But those happen, but they don't happen very often.
okay. Now, when you talk about merchandising in California, there's pretty well-established brands that you mentioned, right? Like Connected, Jetty,
Yep.
etc. What does that look like in a newer market like Missouri? Do you have the same brands in there as licensees? Or is like what's the brand? I've never been to Missouri. So what is it how is it different when you can't necessarily rely on brands that consumers know, especially in a newer market where there's it hasn't been legal for as long from a merchandising perspective.
Yeah, I think Missouri is a very interesting market in that I talked about this at the Ignite conference down in Anaheim yesterday. And Elliot and Patrick Lane did a great job on that. But in Missouri, California brands carry a lot of premium power, and California brands have done a really good job of dictating what their MSRP is going to be to stores. So in Missouri, you find that the brands have a lot of power to be able to set prices. Whereas in California, I never felt that brands had uh, really the same power to be able to dictate that to stores. A lot of the time, they did not realize whether it was a discount or a hard mark change, what that MSRP would be in California. But in Missouri, the brands do a really good job of doing that. So even if a store wanted to provide a discount, they would need the brand's permission to do so. And so in Missouri, because of a lot of different things, you're seeing really good margins and prices holding steady, even though the market, continues to grow.
Okay. And you mentioned discount versus hard mark. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Are you lowering your prices? Are you offering discounts? And then as an adjunct to that, this is a conversation where we're having with the headset. I didn't get to a clear strategy on this, but we were talking about the habit of people that buy certain products tend to buy another product at the same time, right?
Yep.
Whether it's if they buy a vape cartridge, they buy whatever it is. There's
Yep.
some natural bundling that happens. And we were talking about, well, mathematically, does it make more sense to offer the discount on the product that you have more margin on or less margin on if you think that 30% of these sales are going to have another, product attached to it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there to unpack as well, but let's just start with the hard mark difference and again some of the differences between the competitive markets and the emerging markets like in Missouri. So the reality in a competitive market like a California is that the AOV or average order value of a customer basket will dramatically drop over time, not because the retailer is reducing the price, but because of the price from the wholesaler or from the brand is simply dropping on a competitive wholesale price point. So when you look at MetaThrive, for instance, our basket size today is probably 50% of what it was 2 years ago. And it's not that the units are down that much that significantly, right? It's a lot of the same units. It's really just that the actual cost of those products have been reduced so dramatically by wholesalers that people are still buying an eighth of weed just for a much lower price point.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that, that by nature is a just hard mark difference of price that a retailer has a really hard time if a wholesaler or a product is competing, in that area. So again, MetaThrive's done a really good job because consumers really have an affinity and a loyalty to brands when it comes to vape and edibles. So they search for vape and edibles by brand name online. Whereas flower, they generally search by strain, and they're generally trying a lot of different strain types out, on that. So the general consumer has a lot less of an affinity or loyalty. Again, dramatic generalization, for flower products than they do in vape or edibles. Vape or edibles tend to keep their price points higher than flower because flower you have a lot of ebbs and flows in terms of what inventory looks like, and you have a lot of price volatility on that. So when you look at hard marks, that's part of it on hard marks on discounting. That is a temporary price reduction. The challenge on that is many times a customer believes that that temporary price reduction, if it's left up too long, they will see that that is the new hard mark price. And then two is most retailers build a trap for their customers where their customers simply wait on their own buying cycle. And they know within their buying cycle that there's going to be some type of crazy BOGO or flash sale or crazy deal of the day or crazy bundle. And they're just going to wait to go buy on that. One way that we got out of that in Caliva, and again, this was a team trifecta of the tech team that was enabling it, and the e-commerce team, the product team that had the strategy behind it, and then the retail and marketing team that executed against it. All just best in class at what they did. But it was the RFM model, right? So the recency, the frequency, and the monetary value in terms of where the customer set was. And the whole basis was, okay, how do we look at, customer adoption, retention, frequency, what the AOV was. And we came out with, I think, some really, really good solid principles. One of them that served us extremely well was when we went after, customer acquisition, we knew that there was an 80% chance that we had call it a customer for life if we could get a customer in for the fourth time. And when we say a customer for life, they have different, call it frequency of buying. But we saw that that was a loyal customer. And again, I think on the difference between the hard mark and the discounting is what are you there to go do? Most of the time, people are using discounting to try to get new customers in. versus actually just drive volume of their existing customers. And that just doesn't always work. And existing customers, they still have a budget and they can still only smoke so much weed in an hour or a day or, a week. And when we tried some price elasticity, around flower versus other products, it worked the least on flower, simply because of, usage limitations.
When you say price elasticity around flour and it not working, what is the actual implementation of that you tried that did not, move the needle the way you wanted it to?
We A/B tested in different geos on our hero product, on $2 increments online, which was a meritocracy versus, bud tender influence to see what the buying patterns would have between our existing customers and new customers, and found that the yeah, that there was not a increase of amount purchased that correlated to the decrease in price. And when we really tested it, when I really got comfortable and went from $40 an eighth down to $32 an eighth, and yes, that dates me in terms of when I was actually operating
You
those
can get
stores in
ounces for
California.
$50 here. But yeah,
Little different. It actually cannibalized other sales. That's a California story, and that was a California story, and call it, 2000 to 2019. Hannah and I, worked with a great company in Michigan, Pleasantries, and they are in the epicenter of commoditization. If you thought California was bad, Michigan, the bundle deals that you'd see are just insane and unbelievable. And they did a really good job again of merchandising, but they really, we worked with them for a long time to be able to formulate a brand around experience, and experience became the key word of their company, and it was a strategic pillar that was at the top of that pillar, and they said, hey, everything is experiences, and they developed a marketing campaign around that, and they made their stores an experience, and they really did a great job of trying to, um, certainly be better than the curve in terms of just discounts, and value products in a really, really tough, commodity market. But that's how they did that, is branding their company and their store differently, and everybody knew Pleasantries for a great experience.
yeah. Well, that ties right into, the next phase of the conversation, which you've already touched on some of them. But for someone who is trying to figure out how they get out of, discount wars with their neighbors, you just mentioned one is experience. I think overall, people, as long as it's not completely dramatic, a lot of human beings will pay slightly more for the same thing if there are reasons to do so. One could be experience, right? You like going there, you like the experience, the merchandising, the people that work there. The other is potentially like mission driven things. If there's something around, something aligns with their like personal moral, um, alignment. What are the things that you have seen be effective? You obviously experience is working for pleasantries. Um, what are some other things that people could potentially do to say, look, I am not going to just keep dropping my price $5 every week. I'm gonna spend my time and energy, on getting people to want to be my customer and engage with my brand. A brand mean
Yeah,
it could be retail or a brand, but
and I'll answer that in a couple ways, but first, I think it's when we talk about discounting and pricing, it's always, or I would say it's predominantly based on driving the cost to a lower cost, and those types of pricing levers. I do think though, when you're talking about pricing, it goes the other way as well, and that is, if you don't price it properly on a hard mark or a discount and you run out of the product, that to me is a type 2 error, which is you really priced it wrong, and you're out of stock, because you don't lose a sale, you lose a customer if that happens. And so what I learned, early on, and again, we did a lot of experimentation, but we had a new roll your own product in, early days in Caliva, and we went and just experimented to see if we could sell it, and it sold like hotcakes. I mean, it was crazy. And we just ran out of material. And at the time, we weren't sophisticated enough to go have, other contracts with other people. We're vertically integrated, et cetera. So we said, okay, the next batch, we messed up the pricing. Let's increase the pricing. And I did not, I completely underestimated how emotional that consumers got in terms of the reaction as to the increase of pricing. Like it wasn't a, hey, I'm bummed. This was a, how could you do this? Why would you ever lie to me on this? I feel bait and switch. Like I don't trust you. And it was, I mean, it was a really hard lesson to learn, which is you got to get that price right out of the gate, but you got to balance it between not running out of stock. And so pricing goes both ways. And to your question around how do people get out of like the discounting, cycle on it, I go back to lean on the vendors, right? Right. As a retailer, and if you look at just retailers outside of cannabis, they don't really control a lot of the pricing of the goods that they get, right? They're not providing discounts for baseball bats or Clorox wipes or anything else. They come in and say, "Hey, I'm going to manage like my marketing, I'm going to manage store experience. You manage the pricing promotion. It's up to you to be able to sell the things." And in cannabis, retailers do not lean on vendors enough. I'll tell you the story of a great case study of a company Hannah and I work with, Infused out of Washington. Phenomenal, multi-state vape company. To me, they're in the top three in the nation, but they're in Washington, Arizona, New York, and have kind of the one or two spot in each of those areas. They've really differentiated themselves with their retailers through a program of vendor managed inventory. And VMI is the new acronym and buzzword that every single software application is using and trying to bake in. But what they found is because their products sold out so often, right? They found that there was a 30% out of stock rates, for their products. And then they found out that, in terms of the buying cycle, on that, the stores weren't managing the inventory cycle with the buying cycle on it. And so they're actually sitting in with some inventory before the terms were due, on that. So it was just a mess. And so when these stores were able to turn over to MFuse and say, hey, look, you're going to take a hands-on approach. You're going to manage all of the par, the min maxes, and you're going to restock on this open, PO item. They found that the inventory turnover ratio increased by 80%. And so when you look at that, and it fit within their buying cycle. So when you look at something like that, that is turning over from a retailer saying, I'm going to take on store funded, inventory, store funded promotions. I'm going to turn that over to my vendor. I'm going to allow them to have the inventory risk and I'm going to allow them to be able to do the vendor funded discounts. To me, those are some of the more successful retailers out there, but you have to pick the right vendors. So you have to have the right people to say, this is the type of store I am. This is the type of brands I want to work with. These are the types of relationships I want to get into. But that's a strategy to be able to get around that, pricing discount spiral.
Okay. That's how prevalent is that, the VMI? I mean, obviously some people are doing it. I haven't, I don't really spend my time in that intersection of retailer and brand and that those transactions, but is that something that is growing?
The growth can be seen in that every single cannabis technology software vendor is adding a VMI or focusing VMI within their stack. And so I think, Happy Cabbage is one of the leaders of looking at just inventory management. And Happy Cabbage had been an incredible partner for us at MetaThrive, and we credit a lot of the success because of the data that Andrew Watson and his team were able to provide us to be able to get our inventory down so low and to have such efficient working capital. But yes, it's going to be more and more prevalent, and the right vendors will know and understand the challenges that retailers have. And vendors don't want their products discounted or BOGOed out all the time either. So I think you'll see a resurgence of that, and that happens today. And again, more limited license states like Missouri than it has in states like California. But I think that it certainly is one tactic that, from a vendor standpoint, has been extremely successful on the MFU side of things.
Great. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about promotions. You mentioned something I want to dig into more, which is the timing of promotions.
Sure.
and the structure, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can offer discounts. One of the things that we talk about sometimes is, when we're running campaigns in different like household income areas where there's different AOVs, just the same exact discount when it's presented in a dollar figure versus a percentage can have a meaningful impact on the
Yep.
advertising, right? Advertising account that says it's 20% off or it's $20 off or whatever. That can change a lot of things. How do you think about promos in terms of the mechanics and the timing?
Yeah, and I mean, again, we learned a lot in what all of that looked like, but I'd go back to, do you know your customer? And it's amazing to me when I ask retailers another simple question, which is, how many unique active customers do you have? A lot of people just can't answer the question.
Yeah.
And you'd think like, of course they do, because they have their license IDs and they know their names and numbers. Well, if you dedupe the 5 emails at the same address because somebody went through unnatural lengths to be able to go get that first time customer discount, you'd be surprised on how often that happens, and you'd be surprised on how many retailers are not effective, even though they get somebody's license, to put them into an opt-in program for an email or SMS. And so, and when you look at, active and unique, retailers just aren't spending a lot of time to go do that. So your question around where and how can you have, promotions that are effective, they have to be relevant. So they have to know what people did buy or what people's preferences are, and it has to be unique to them if you have any information on them. So the first thing is there is no consumer CRM out there. People use, things like Klaviyo as a substitute, for that, and people are trying to build this CDP for cannabis and other consumer products, but it doesn't really exist today. And so you don't have a full view of what the customer looks like. And then if you say, hey, well, I actually want to do this for a new customer acquisition, it still has to be relevant, and it still has to have some authenticity in terms of what you're doing. And so it has to tie into what your brand is or what your event is. And you need to know, is it, specific to a specific product, a specific brand, a specific store, or a specific channel. And so for us at Caliva, again, the team, and I would credit the creative team, and the marketing team at the time. We had a creative savant, Rosie Rothrock, who was able to just have incredibly relevant campaigns. Some of them were branding just to be able to get in the store, but also some of them were, very target focus based and on some type of activity. And that activity could have been, hey, progression to get to your fourth, sale. It could have been, hey, you have been in store, but you haven't done delivery yet. So let's go do that, because we knew, if you cross sold somebody in a omnichannel basis, their loyalty significantly increases. But it has to have a purpose, and has to have a relevancy in terms of what that either new consumer or existing consumer is. And that's hard to do. You got to think through it. You can't just slap that on, and you can let your vendors go do some of those sales for you, but that doesn't always fit within your, ethos or your marketing of your retail store.
Yeah. We're looking a lot at customer purchase timing right now because, we are at Mediajel, we've really tying into the actual sales data now and looking at purchase frequency, and analyzing,
Yep.
new customers, returning customers. But inside of a lot of people think about it in two ways. They say I have returning customers and new customers, and they just put them in one of the two buckets. And of course, everyone is heavily focused on new customers. Um,
Yep.
Now, when you look at the analytics, when you're running advertising, though, we can look at what the different behavior is, right? So, like I would say on average right now, when we're measuring what we call win backs, which is someone who hasn't shopped in 60 days, that's configurable.
Yep.
You can choose a different time frame. The average is about 102 days, meaning that for someone who you hadn't seen in a while, they saw some advertising, they came in and made a purchase, it's a little over 100 days. Um, and then it goes all the way out as far as, 6 months or however far back you're looking. But we can see In some cases, for that cohort, the AOV goes down a little bit, right? By sometimes as low as like 5%. Sometimes it's actually a little bit higher, but let's just take that example of the AOV went down by 5%, but the purchase frequency went up by 34%, right?
Yep.
So the same set of customers that were shopping on whatever cadence they were shopping on when you start exposing them to the brand on a frequent basis, they come in more frequently, right? And so your net value of that customer goes up. I think the AOV decrease when that happens is because of two things that are pretty intuitive. One is they probably don't need to buy as many things, um, but there's also likely some amount of discounting, right? They're seeing an offer and they're taking advantage of a discount. Um, but let's just tie all that back into how long do you offer a discount for? You probably need to understand your customer purchase cycles, right? How often do they come in? And ideally you put them into different cohorts. Um, but it sounds like what you were alluding to is you want to make sure that the discounts aren't so convenient and so frequent that you have people that are like, well, I'm just going to wait until, next Thursday instead of buying something now, when I might actually be in sort of in a buying state of mind.
Yeah, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer on these things, and you got to experiment and you got to know what your experiment's going to do, and you got to be able to track and measure it, right? We did billboards and we did, unique promo codes on billboards, and sometimes those worked, sometimes those didn't work. Did we have all the right data on it? Don't know. But you have to have an intent for those promotions or those discounts. At MetaThrive. We do discounts for delivery to get the AOV up higher than $100, and that works. And that's what drives profitability of delivery is your AOV being at or above somewhat a $90 rate, and that you're getting two to two and a half deliveries per hour per driver. And if you can go do that, you're generally in good shape. And so our bundling discounts for delivery channel specifically is for that. What still works for MetaThrive and worked for Caliva as well is Tuesday from 9 to 11. If that's a dead time, and you've seen that there's current customers that you have that have had off times to be able to come in and buy, then offer them a some type of special or some type of VIP or concierge or consultation or some type of loyal customer discount that's only open from 9 to 11. So none of these ideas for promotions are rocket science, and I'm sure ChatGPT does a better job than anybody now. If you said, "Hey, list out the top 100, most commonly used promotions in, cannabis retail," and it kick them all out. Um, Everybody's thought of those. It's really the difference of the people that can put them together in a sequence, and that your customers look at what your marketing and promotions are, and they're not surprised by it, and it fits in with what you're doing, and it's relevant to the customer. But it really goes back to that, do you know your customer, and that are you investing in any type of customer data platform, that CDP, to be able to get to know your customers better? And if you're not focusing on that, online and offline, you're missing probably your most valued resource for sure.
All right. For those of you that are here on Zoom, there is a Q&A section. You can type in some questions if you have some questions for Dennis. Um, let's go. Um, let's see if we can bundle up some of these thoughts into a strategic framework or a go-to-market or an action plan, whatever you want to call it, for someone that wants to figure out a way to get to reposition themselves if they have been relying just really solely on discounts. Um, how would you, and I know you charge people money for this, so you don't have to give out, all the secrets here, but uh,
Sure.
if you were to, say, here's a simple plan of ways to think about your business and some steps you can take to move yourself away from being discount driven into what?
Well, I will give it away, and I'll give it away just for you, Jake.
Oh,
So,
good. Thank you.
you're here first. On one end, it's not that hard and it's not rocket science. On the other end, it's hard to execute against. It's just an income statement. So if you provide to your retail team or if you own your retail store and you simply have a basis that says, I am going to do anything I can to be at a 55 to 60% gross margin basis on a retail basis, what does that mean? That means that I have to price things between a 2.2 and a 2.5x markup in terms of what I buy things for. So do I have to buy things and do I have to be a great buyer? Yes, I do. And so I got to negotiate and find what that is. Do can I afford discounts? Because 2.5x means a 60% gross margin. So if I'm starting off at 60% gross margin, I'm trying to get down to 55. I have 5%, margin to play with in terms of discounting on that. So I'm going to need a lot of help from my vendors to do vendor funded discounts if I'm trying to get to that 55 to 60% gross margin on there. Oh, by the way, do I have the working capital that I need to be able to keep the inventory, and how long do I want to keep the inventory? Well, if it's 14 days, that buying cycle, you got to communicate to the vendors that they have to show up and they have to deliver things on a 14-day basis. You also have to pay them on a 14-day basis. So, do you have the working capital workflow to be able to go do that? And do you have the right vendors? That all goes into, okay, great. Now I have the COGS that I wanted. I have the inventory spot that I wanted. How much am I going to spend on marketing? And what does that look like? And am I going to rely on my existing customer base versus new customer base? And that's really dependent on the share of market that you have and where you're at, right? Um, in a market like Missouri, you're going to see a much higher, marketing rate and much different marketing mix than you'll see at MetaThrive that has, 10 plus years of customers. But a lot of those customers are also tourists. A lot of those customers, have left the mission in the local area. So you got to know your customers, and then you have to look at your labor rate in a growing market where you're over staffing and labor. You're generally running at a, call it maybe 15 to 18% of your labor, based on your net sales in a market like we had at Caliva or what MetaThrive's doing. You're trying to get that down to 6 to 8%. And so if you look at those controllables, you can't control your rent. Like there's some things you can do to control your delivery or other things. You really can't control your software kind of all the time. Your taxes, you're going to pay 13%, 280E if you're paying 280E on your, 60%, gross margin. So those are really the only three variables that you're going to be able to control: gross margin, marketing spend, and your employee costs. And if you manage those first, you're going to back into how much discount you can play with, and whatever you put on your vendor, that is your budget to be able to manage discounts. And once you have that budget, go hog wild and do all the crazy things that you want. But that budget needs to entail the promotion of promoting that discount, the actual discount, as well as loyalty. Because if you're running at loyalty being kind of over 7% of an additional discount, that's running really hot, and that's at the super high end of it. Even 4 to 5% is pretty high. We try to always go at, the 2 to 3% of a loyalty program, as the value to the customer. So, I mean, to me, the strategic framework is the income statement, and knowing the income statement and your variability. And that's where, again, to your point around where Hannah and I have been successful with these companies in different states and different mature markets, is just working through what that looks like. And sometimes they're large, omni-channel, tens of millions of dollars in revenue. Sometimes it's the MetaThrives of the world that are, single millions. Sometimes it's in, crazy states like Mississippi, that's, medical market and trying to figure things out.
Well, that just sounds like boring business fundamentals, Dennis. Nobody wants to hear, look at your income statement. We were hoping for like a magic recipe, but I guess we'll
Yeah.
have to disappoint. That makes total sense, right? I mean,
Was that my cue to say buy Mediajel to be able to go drive more
oh,
more people through a
no, that
programmatic
was
to your
not, we tried,
website?
not, no, not trying to do that. I mean, but I will say that it's the same for many businesses, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we run advertising. It's not dissimilar, right? We buy a bulk product. We are
Yep.
specifically looking for, it's eyeballs, right? We're selling eyeballs,
Yep.
right? So our job is to find the right ones at a cost where we can deliver those to our advertisers where they're making a profit, right, on the dollars that they're spending and they're driving additional revenue and they want to reinvest and grow their budgets. But we also have, we have a spread there, right, that we have to use to be able to run our business. And
Sure.
we've actually done a similar thing internally in the sense that like our whole management team has access to our P&L and L, and we use that as a planning tool, right? Which
Yep.
is okay, what is the performance we're delivering for advertisers? What is their ROAS right now? Where can we figure out ways to buy media for cheaper to deliver better results? But it is true that by explaining that to at least your management team of what's going on, you then have the framework to not just be like, well, let's just change this discount from 20% to 30% because you're coming from the top down, right? You're right, if you give yourself a budget, which again is very boring and depressing. But yeah, that does in other ways it does for you though, right? Because you don't have to guess anymore. You're like, I have X amount to work with. Then you have an open palette with that budget of discounts to, try to drive incentives.
Yeah, I've found if you start there, people get really creative and they figure things out. But discounting's hard. I mean, you're talking about how do you stack discounts? What does that look like? And then when you talk about, vendor funded discounts, you have to have, a management of the credits because they're usually providing that vendor funded discount through additional product, not through any type of cash or credit. And that's hard to account for. And you got to be able to work through that. But the numbers don't lie, and retailers, in emerging states like Missouri, if you're under 50%, you are underperforming. In Michigan or California, I would still say, low 40s, you're still running hot. But I've seen, retailers run in the mid 60s, in the highs, in the high 60s. And if you can do that, you have a pretty good business to be able to, continue to market to new customers and to staff appropriately where people are going to feel like they have a great experience.
Yeah, and then depending on what you're doing with your taxes, right? Which is on taxes, we're almost wrapping up, but just out of curiosity, get, a contemporary question here. What is your take on de or rescheduling rumors that have been flown about? Do you have a time frame? Oh, well, I gotta start with, do you think it's going to happen? At some point. I think it's going to happen at some point. But do you think it's soon or do you think it's later?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the similar thing that I said on stage yesterday, except I won't use adult language. That I've been more wrong than anybody on terms of just timing and having rosy ears to be able to hear what I wanted to hear on rescheduling. The reality is any type of regulatory framework that would change, that would have any type of tax implication change for the industry, would take just a very long time, and I don't think anybody can bet on it. I think the reality is that when you start looking at your competitors who are discounting products and you're going, how are they making money? Well, they're not paying their taxes, and they're likely not paying their vendors. And so I think the takeaway here is, regardless of rescheduling, descheduling happens or not, you have to have a fundamentally good business. And this industry specifically, there are many operators that can't run a profitable business and don't chase what they're doing on a pricing standpoint. You really have to manage that on your own, and what your goals are. So that's my advice on the rescheduling and descheduling and all of that. If it happens, there will be more investment into the space. It will be the best for retailers. But most people aren't paying their 280E taxes anyway, so there won't be a massive difference. And frankly, I think people will take any savings and pass it on to the customers because a lot of people do that lazy marketing where they're just going to compete on price.
All right, fair enough. Okay, a few minutes left. We're gonna go through a quick lightning round that
Cool.
recording is provided for me, so let's do it. Uh,
All right.
Number one, best promo you ever ran at Caliva.
I can't take credit for it, but it's Freedom. So with a W, so Fweed, and that was January 1st, 2018, when cannabis was adult use in California. So it's just
Yeah,
is
I get it. Yes,
incredible.
Knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. It was
Yes.
incredible branding from the branding team. But
Perfect.
that was the best promo ever.
Okay, number two, most overrated discount tactic in cannabis.
BOGO,
Number three, one brand outside cannabis that you admire for how they handle pricing.
one brand outside cannabis.
Outside cannabis, pricing.
Patagonia.
Okay. Well, now I have to know why, real quick.
They are all about mission-driven items that they're not discounting, that people are buying because they feel good about buying their product, not because of what the price point is.
Great, thank you. What's the first metric you look at to know if a promo worked?
Unique discount code.
Number of unique discount codes used?
No, if for instance, like I use that billboard example, so we'd put up a unique discount code, how many times that unique discount code was used.
I see. Okay, great.
Problem is, you get too many of those discount codes, a different issue, but yes, that's a single metric I'm looking at.
Yeah, we've seen some other issues with those. Anyway, okay, number five. One thing a retailer should stop doing tomorrow.
It's what you led off with, which is selling the exact same product that your neighbor is selling.
Okay.
Stop that.
All right. Biggest myth about cannabis consumers and price sensitivity.
You can only smoke so much in a day. If you lower the price, they're going to buy relatively the same amount. If it's flower, they might buy a little bit more edibles or a little bit more vape, but it's not going to dramatically cause people to increase their consumption habits.
Okay. What's the boldest pricing move that you ever made that paid off? We know it's not increasing the price on the ready to roll
Roll your
product.
own. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I take no credit for this. It was a great team led by Steve Winchell, who was our head of product at the time. It was a new category, a 1 gram vape pen that was Fun Uncle Cruisers at the time, right during COVID, and he hard marked the price at $25. Did a lot of studying as to what that would look like, and quickly, I think out of the top 10 best-selling vapes, within 2 months, it probably had 7 out of the top 10 spots. So he crushed it in terms of just hard marketing and pricing.
All right. That's cool. Okay. Number eight, favorite way to add value for customers without cutting price.
Um, Stickers. People love stickers. Smiles. People love smiles.
Stickers and
I mean,
smiles. Hey, all
it,
right. I
it,
mean,
it,
any
it,
answer is valid.
it, I mean, literally though, if you ask somebody about Um, the longer story on this is we had a board member at Caliva who was responsible for over 20 years rolling out Starbucks stores. And I always asked him, I said, hey, how do I build a product where there's such ownership and personalization? Because when people say Starbucks, they say, I'm going to get my Starbucks, right? I'm going to get my Pete's, but they personalize the ownership of that product. I always thought was amazing. And he always said, the store came before the product. And I said, why was that? And he said it was that trusted place of the community feel where people went and then they learned to be able to buy the product. And so while I joke about stickers and smile, there's a lot to be said in terms of what that experience is when you have that in real life experience or you surprise and delight online. And I really do think that is the baseline of what somebody should do before they can go do anything else. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to have a loyal customer.
Great. All right. Number nine, what's harder, raising prices or
Raising
holding the
prices.
line on them?
What was the second part?
See, the holding the line on them.
Raising prices.
Raising prices is the hard part. Okay, great.
Harder
Uh,
than anything.
Last one here. One word of advice for retailers stuck in the discount spiral.
Merchandise.
Merchandise. Okay,
Is
great.
that a word?
That it is a word. Yeah, that
There you
you
go.
can use more words than you were allowed to. So great, merchandise. Well, we're right up here on the hour. Timing worked out perfectly. Dennis, again, thank you so much for your time and expertise and
Pleasure.
wisdom. Um, if someone is interested either here now or listening later in reaching out to you, maybe there's a retailer that might want to get some advice from you. How can people get a hold of you? And don't say your name because nobody knows how to spell that.
Yeah, it is. We've been under the radar for 3 years, so it's sometimes hard to get a hold of us. It's just do, and it is at Ectray, so it's ECHTR.ai, or Hannah at Ectray as well. So
Or you can probably be found on LinkedIn, Dennis O'Malley.
LinkedIn, that I can. Yep, exactly.
Or
Thanks to Courtney, I can be found more than before. So
yeah, she's good at that. Um, Great. Well, thanks again. Have a
thank
fantastic
you.
day, and I'm
Awesome,
sure
Jake.
we'll talk
Thanks.
soon.
Enjoyed it. Bye.